Hey everybody, welcome to Binkhorsts and Blockbusters. I'm Kate,
And I'm Gerrit.
and tonight we are going to be reviewing a classic horror movie as part of our spooktacular October Spooktober month-long horror fest, The Exorcist.
Yay.
Yep, so if you're new here, this is a brother-sister podcast where we talk about movies, and we would be doing this on Zoom no matter what. So we decided to share it with you guys and bring some cool facts and research and opinions to the world with uh, gusto, apparently. I'm really excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, I'm excited too. This was the first time I'd ever seen this film, but I feel like I've seen a lot of parts of the film just by, being a part of, media consumption. A lot of
Hmm.
references, a lot of parodies, um, a lot of like styles and tropes come directly from this movie, or as a result of like its influence over people.
Yeah, that's a huge part of this. And like I know I have seen this movie before, but I just did not remember it. And I think that a lot of that is that so many parts of this movie have been parodied over and over, and parts have been taken for other series. And like I also really enjoy the kind of possession horror genre. The most recent series that really hits this one good is The Conjuring, which is my favorite of like the current horror, series that are out right now. So I'm excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, so let's get into it. But first, what's on TV?
Yes, so spoilers are here, so please skip ahead. Use the goober hopper at the bottom of the screen to skip to the next section if you have not seen Ahsoka, because we are going to talk about it now. And surprise, this was the last episode. All the episodes are out on the air and it's over. And I didn't see that one coming. Did you?
I knew there were going to be 8 episodes, but coming from episode 7, I really thought there was going to be more.
Yeah, I was really like when you told me this was the last episode, I was just like, "What? What are you talking about? How are they going to wrap this up? Like where I thought the plot was going somewhere. Like what is happening?" And I'm kind of this is really disappointing to me because I had the same thing kind of happening in Andor, where like halfway through the series you get to this point where you actually think that the series is going to end, because that's how these like small Star Wars series have been going. They're short 8 episodes, and they just kind of end abruptly, and that's what I thought Andor was going to happen. But there was a whole other part of Andor and it was great. So Andor, 5 stars. Ahsoka, mm,
Yeah, I hesitate to rate this one simply because like I went into it knowing, or I went into it not wanting to like it. Um, just because I don't really have faith in this brand of Star Wars. Um, so much of it was fan service and like key jingling and just really uninspired.
mm-hmm.
Um, I'm just really disappointed that, something that I've enjoyed for so long is just really like boring now. There were so many just scenes and times in the show where I was just like, okay, you guys are standing around having a really unorganic conversation about something that we've had a conversation about 3 times. Now there's an action scene. What was the point of any of this? And the last episode really was nothing different. There was a lot of like big spectacles and things going on, and a lot of, I think, unearned moments with our characters, whether they succeed or fail. And especially in the second to last episode, where they just kind of blunder into success. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and it just wasn't. I mean, honestly, it wasn't as colorful despite having a red lady and a green lady. It was just felt very gray, and there are other elements of it that I don't want to get into too spoily with it, like that I just was like, I didn't realize this was part of the Star Wars universe, and I was kind of happier when it wasn't, because like Star Wars is sci-fi, but it has some magic elements with the Jedi. And I don't think that it really needs to go beyond that because it has that already. I mean, Jedi are pretty powerful wizards when you think about it. So,
They're only powerful sometimes when the plot allows them to be. Um,
well, that's true too.
but yeah, I think like and this is the problem I think in a lot of these like huge cinematic universes as like more and more people come in and they start adding more and more things, it gets really bloated, and then for casual viewers like us who don't want to sit and watch the 80 hours of animated content, it's really hard to get into the mythos when they add these like witches that have like their whole origin story, and like they expand all these locations and characters, but then in this show they don't like explain any of it. It's just sort of expected you understand.
Yeah. And I think it's supposed to be mysterious, but that doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah, like it's definitely a tough balancing act in like a lot of other media of having something that's like mysterious but has a lot of like mythology behind it that's explained. But this was just really difficult, and not really entertaining. Even the like action and duels and stuff weren't exciting or felt like they had a lot of stakes.
Yeah, yeah. As you mentioned earlier in one of our other podcasts, the because significant people seem to be experiencing violence in a way that we would think that they would be dead, and then them coming back to life, it certainly ends, a lot of the, suspense moving forward, where, these people essentially become immortal.
Yeah. And like on one hand I understand like you want these characters who have a lot of power and influence to keep going, but I don't know, some of the best moments I think in the original Star Wars were when the characters like came up against something and they failed, and that was a huge point of like being able to grow. And I guess in this show they have that, but it doesn't really come at a physical cost.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there's very much like very, very little emotional loss, because they get out scot-free essentially.
and the
And
actors can't emote.
yeah, and these actors aren't particularly good at emoting, that's for sure. But I mean, Jedi, have always seemed to have a problem with that. Going back to Anakin and Obi-Wan, and I mean, even, Liam Neeson and Samuel Jackson as a Jedi had the same problem. So, it's a Jedi problem, and I think it's something that they build into these characters, and I think that's a problem with the whole universe. So, I mean, we're probably going to get canceled for that bit. But anyway, that's how I feel.
Yeah, I tell my friends to listen to our show all the time, but I feel like if half of them heard me talking this much shit about Star Wars, they'd stop talking to me.
Well, I also think that, there's twofold issue here. I think that part of the reason why we both struggled with this particular show is that we didn't watch, the prerequisite amount of Star Wars in order to understand what was going on. But I also think that our friends have failed us in that they should have explained to us what the heck is going on also. So that's on them.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that over the years, especially when I watched The Mandalorian with one of my friends who like knew some of the stuff. Is it's like, okay, we're clearly missing out on a big portion here. But
Yeah. Well, and I think that the Mandalorian series in general has done a better job at creating a world and like building it so that you don't necessarily need to know anything else. Because it's a much smaller, premise, I think, than this. Like these people are so close to like the top of the food chain, and this was a similar problem that I had with like Obi-Wan. That if you don't know the politics, then you're going to be lost. And in this one, I was completely lost in the politics and um, what was going on and who these people were and like blah 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 blah, even what time it was. Like, and I think that that's just something that I'm going to be complaining about for a long time with Star Wars. But I'll keep watching it because it is pretty and decent, and I am a fantasy sci-fi nerd and I want more fantasy sci-fi, so I'll just keep consuming what they send us.
That's fair. So coming up next in the endless stream of Star Wars media is going to be another show. This one stars Jude Law as a Force user. It's called Skeleton Crew, and it's not specifically written and directed exclusively by Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni. So that's a good sign considering Andor also wasn't. That was pretty good. Uh,
You didn't tell me it was Jude Law, Garrett. Jeez.
I left that out. I wanted an authentic reaction.
So, like, I mean, Jude Law, very attractive, but I just don't think he's a great actor. And I'm afraid that we're just going to be going into this cycle again with the same problems. I mean, the other thing is that all I'm thinking about is that Jude Law played a prostitute in AI in like 2001. So that's the Jude Law I'm thinking about. Maybe he's grown a bit in 22 years.
He was Dumbledore for a bit.
Garrett, I don't consume Harry Potter anymore.
Okay,
I'm.
that's very fair.
We're supportive of our trans allies here. We don't consume Harry Potter on this podcast.
Yeah,
But honestly, I totally forgot that he was in those too because I don't watch them because I thought they were dumb to begin with.
they were awful.
Yeah. Yeah. What else is Jude Law in? Come on, give me something better.
Um,
Okay, well, we will excitedly tune into the next Disney Star Wars series, and hopefully we'll be able to give our fans some warning as to when that occurs. But if it's anything like Ahsoka, we'll know the night before.
yeah. So that was our requisite 10 minutes talking about Star Wars.
Sorry, friends. Sorry.
What else is on TV?
So we've both been watching The Continental, which is a mini series, 3 episodes, which are both about an hour and a half long, that are in set in the John Wick universe. We talked about this last week, but if you didn't tune in, we're in episode 2. Another episode's coming out this Friday, which will probably be before this podcast releases. So if you're interested in, like heavy action, John Wick. There's a
Trashy
lot of
New York.
trashy, dark, gritty, mob-y, but not the mob, not the old, usual mob. This
Cars.
is a great show. Yes, there's cars. There's, like if you like Fast and Furious, you're probably gonna like this.
But if you like music,
So if you like music from the 70s, you're either going to love or hate this show. And I mean, I am a classic rock girl, and it is grating some of the choices that they made in the music in this television show.
it's a lot. There's tons of classic music that they've licensed for the show, and it's all played, but you only get a little bit of each song. I don't feel like any of them get a chance to breathe. There are a lot of really like stereotypical uses and a lot of just like, why is this song being used here? It's
Yeah,
very confusing.
yeah. I mean, it's very much like it feels like they're trying to do Tarantino and use music in an action sequence in a fun and interesting way to propel the momentum forward. But it's not working at all. It's really not working. It's working very badly, and I don't like it. There was one moment, it was a quiet moment, and they just start playing Yes's Roundabout. And I mean, it's just that song just does not belong there. And then they only play like, 5 seconds of it before they're on to something else. And it's just really not um It's not good. The music part. The other problem that I think the reason why we're both noticing it is that this is a show, I'm turning the volume up to like 85 on my TV in order to hear what anybody's saying, and then being
Yes.
just like blasted by, classic rock tunes. And I'm going, what the hell? Like, this is made for television. This was made for a streaming app. It should have been, optimized for streaming on television, but it was not.
Yeah, this is a problem I have with a lot of things I watch on TV, of just like the balancing or the mixing is just bad.
Hmm.
Um, now
Yeah,
I
and
don't,
HBO is a huge problem with that.
yeah, well, this is on Peacock, so like it's across the board. There's a lot of problems. So I did some digging into why on earth there were all these licensed tracks. And they're selling a companion album that is just music from this movie, but none of it's original. So it's all like this sort of stuff. It's all the classics just kind of lumped together. Um,
Hmm.
I think that's a bit weird, especially that they're selling it in a physical album form. I think it's a bit strange. Uh,
Yeah, I mean that is an odd marketing ploy, and I mean I wouldn't be surprised if it has to do with the like whatever record label a lot of these were on, because they're all very classic rock songs,
yeah,
disco, that kind of thing. That Yeah, I mean it's clearly just a weird marketing thing, and it's annoying how pervasive it is in the show, and it's just a strange part, and it's not ruining the show at all. Like, I definitely would recommend you watch it. Like, it's decent, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. But it's just a very odd thing that's happening in this television show that I hope doesn't get caught on and show up in other things.
yeah. I definitely think like a lot of really classic music, it just shows up in a lot of like shows and movies, and like they try to make big scenes out of it.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and it's like in The Bear, I noticed, just like immediately, that was one of the things that I was so impressed with was the music selection in The Bear, because they picked so many songs that are just so important to like my adolescence in the Midwest. It was that gritty Smashing Pumpkins, Sufjan Stevens, just like it was like it gave me the flavor of Chicago in a way that, I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's something that can be done well, and it's something that can be done not as good.
yeah, I don't think the music necessarily captures the feelings of the New York that we're seeing.
No, no, and that's disappointing because it could have. They could have made this make a lot more sense.
Yeah, because the like set design and immersion and costumes and all that work really well to like put you in New York City. Um,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
yeah, the music kind of just weird choices all around.
Yeah, and this is something that I was thinking about when I was watching Ahsoka, was like, I wonder if, part of the issue that we're seeing here is that, like, we're about to talk about a feature-length movie that, took a year to shoot, and, had all this budget and had all of these things going into it. So much time and effort and planning and thought went into, The Exorcist. And in general, most films have that level of intensity, and that's only for 2 hours of film. But these television shows like the Continental, like each episode's almost 2 hours long, so you have 6 hours that just do not get the same amount of attention. And same thing with Ahsoka, that's
Yeah,
probably at least 6 hours overall, maybe closer to 8. But that time frame just doesn't get the same amount of attention to detail that movies do. And I think that if prestige television is going to make itself act like a movie and like cinema and like film, then it has to put more effort into it. And I mean, On one hand, I think that maybe you don't have to put as much effort into it as a feature length film, but because you have more scenes, you have more time to develop characters and do all that, but there should still be more attention to detail. And it's just we're in an interesting time of television where studios are putting out TV that is purporting and trying to be the same high quality as film, but for various reasons, it's not quite hitting the mark.
Yeah, I feel like you summed up I guess the sphere of television very well there. Like it really is trying to be more like film now, especially all these direct to streaming things. But it's not quite there.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't need to be, maybe not. Like maybe we're just holding television to too high of a standard. Like should Ahsoka have been a 3 movie Star Wars series that was released over, several years? Because that's what would have happened in the 2000s.
Right.
Like thinking about like even Pirates of the Caribbean, that series, it's the same amount of television probably after, all 3 films. And, I don't know which would have been better, which would have satisfied fans more, which would have made them more money is also a good question. If these studios are basing all of their, projections and stuff on revenue obtained in the box office rather than on streaming services, then maybe switching to films instead of these, mega prestige television series is a better option for them.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. Because I think like you could probably trim down the entirety of the Continental to be like either one movie or like 2 movies. And you could then have the benefit of having like theatrical releases rather than whatever deal they cut. Um, and I know that Disney wanted to do that with the Obi-Wan movie that was originally going to be a movie and not a series, but then like it just got bigger and bloated and then they made it into a series. So I figure this is something that they consider, and we're just witnessing the like, effects, and that they're going to be studying it for a while before they figure out like the winning formula for what gets to be what. It's very interesting because this is like a lot of the TV that I've grown up watching. Is this like prestige television? The gone
Mm-hmm.
are the era of like all of these sitcoms and things like that and procedural dramas. It's very quickly transforming to um, all of these bigger budget, higher value things. Um, it's an interesting transformation, and they are trying.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think that, that this is going to be the outcome is that they're going to pull back, I think. And because I think that, HBO went with during the pandemic, they were just, or like shortly after the pandemic, the idea was just to like start throwing money at things, anything, and seeing what sticks,
Mhm.
as opposed to throwing lots of money at very particular projects like they had in the past. Like with Westworld and Deadwood and Rome and The Sopranos and those kinds of television shows where, they were really only running one mega show at a time, and that was giving them all that money. Game of Thrones, like don't forget
Yeah.
about Game of Thrones. Um, and I do see them returning to that model where, that each of the studios should be focusing on one really good show at a time. Especially if it's a drama like The Bear, like True Detective,
Yeah.
like and I mean hopefully Disney can get it together with what they're doing with Star Wars, because I think that's part of the issue. And I think Marvel has the same issue where, rather than putting out a movie that, is going to make big money in the box office, they put in a series. That sometimes work. Like WandaVision, that worked. I didn't, watch all the episodes because I don't particularly care about Marvel, but it worked for what it needed to do to show the transition of that character. Other Marvel shows, not as successful at all.
Yeah.
And I think that, not all Marvel movies are successful either. But the bottom line with both Star Wars and Marvel is that people will go see these movies in the theater and fork out the big bucks and, go see them multiple times because that's what Star Wars fans and Marvel's fans do. So why not just do that? Why not create several, smaller, better things than a whole bunch of little things?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Quality over quantity, but the numbers probably don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Uh, but to move on to something that is definitely quality, our
The
feature film.
Exorcist.
Uh, The Exorcist, we have some lore behind The Exorcist.
Oh, family lore, is that what you're alluding to?
Yes, that was the transition I was hoping that you would latch on to quickly.
Sorry, I have the brain of a weasel. So our mother saw this movie when she was in high school. And for years, she would talk about The Exorcist and like, oh, it's a cursed movie. There's a curse, not just, the like stuff, with the like we'll talk about the actual curse later on. But so she had a cursed experience going to see The Exorcist with some guys when she was in high school, where they went to see the movie and they got a ticket on the way there. And then they saw the movie, and my mom was so moved by this movie, she couldn't walk out of the theaters, which
It's
is
just,
pretty crazy.
yeah, just an absolutely ludicrous experience.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, she had to be carried out of the theaters only to find out the guys she went with accidentally locked the keys in the car. And so it took them a very long time to get that resolved and get back home.
Yeah,
After midnight, she said.
yes, we have some quotes from our mom. She said, absolutely terrified that it left her up the entire night and that it was very real to her. And these are like the opinions of someone who saw it 50 years ago.
Hmm.
And like that's crazy to me that the like experience of going to the movie stuck with her that long.
Yeah, yeah, that has always been interesting. I know I wonder how much of it is that like, she likes telling the story. But yeah, that certainly speaks to the power of this movie. And I mean, the other thing to note here is that, our family's not Catholic or Jesuit or any of these kind of like ultra Orthodox Christian religions. So like there wasn't that kind of an element. But yeah, this movie and it really had a profound effect on her.
Yeah. Um, so this movie came out in 1973, and the official full title of the film, which was really contested, was William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. He wrote a book that was based off of a real exorcism that occurred, and it got a lot of attention, got a lot of fame. A lot of the people that became actors in it had like a deep connection to the book, either within who they wanted their characters to be or like read it and it reminded them of like their religious roots. Um, some people attribute the film to like bringing people back to religion because they got really scared of it and they felt like it was really very real. Um, this film, so in The Thing, we talked a little bit about like understanding a movie and like its cultural significance based off of the time in American history when it came out. Because most of the movies we talk about are, pretty exclusively like American movies. And this one's no different. So 1973 in America was the beginning of a pretty turbulent time in our country. The Vietnam War had just ended. Just prior to this film's Christmas release, Richard Nixon had been ousted for the Watergate scandal. So we had our first uh, commander in chief deposed. Um, it was the beginning of some recessions and the first oil crisis we experienced. So a lot of people in America, this was like a turbulent time. The post-war boom was like deflating, and a lot of like the baby boomers and things were growing up and seeing the world for the first time. And much like we're seeing the world, they started to see the cracks and it falling apart. Um,
Yeah, and I always find that the way that people produce art during a disaster or during rough and turbulent times is very interesting. You know, like the things that we turn to, like right now, even like in the pandemic, there's just this huge boom in science fiction and fantasy, in the, more popular consumption of television. Um,
yeah, as
and I think that
escapism.
that's yeah, yeah, the escapism of a culture is always very interesting. And in this instance where they're turning to this kind of like religious horror genre, it's also very interesting. And usually in times of crisis people don't turn to scary things or bad things or, stuff like that. But I think that scary movies tend to give us the feeling that we're alive by creating an anxiety. And especially in a post-war moment, like if the war is over, like a lot of people are looking for that kind of escapism.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm not a psychologist. This is just something that I've seen in patterns of art history over time.
yeah, the thing I really like about horror movies is that like it gets you to feel really extreme ranges of emotion that like in the real world you wouldn't be comfortable experiencing. Like I'm not saying you're
Hmm.
comfortable experiencing like fear and dread, but it's at least safe when it's just on the TV. It might leave you like paranoid and shook, but at least like you're not paranoid of like real dangers or shocked from like a real or traumatic experience. Um, Not to say like films can't be traumatic in some ways, but it would be much different than like the events of it happening to you.
Yeah.
So this movie had a pretty interesting release. So it was the highest grossing release from a Christmas box office up until Titanic, which is another film we talked about early on. Um,
Wow. And it was a Christmas release, so it's a Christmas movie?
uh, no. It was released over the Christmas holiday because they figured more people would have like the free time to go and see it, which was very true. Um,
Hmm.
However, it was in theaters for 105 weeks, so almost 2 years, which is unheard of today. Like really unheard of. Um,
Yeah, that's crazy. 2 years in theaters.
Yeah, but it got that from the word of mouth from so many people to go and see it. It generated $440 million on a $12 million budget. It was a huge movie. Everybody was talking about it. Um, it was just one of those that like got picked up and worked, and it's its legacy continues to live on in a bunch of sequels, and the reboot that's just released this week.
Yeah, and as we'll talk about later, it's a movie that like profoundly changed this whole genre of film. Before this, we were talking about like what horror movies came out before this. Well, before this, there was a lot of Hitchcock's, The Haunting, those kinds of films where, that were just totally different from this movie.
yeah, most of the like ghosts and terrifying things were like, in your Draculas, your Frankensteins, your Wolfman, they were very like pulpy, almost. I wouldn't say cartoony, but um they were less visceral, definitely. Um, this film, they wanted to make it like almost like shocking and graphic, and they just about got into problems with the like ratings review board, but that didn't happen because there isn't like a lot of, let's say, like gore. There's plenty of like disturbing things, but there's nothing that would have promoted it to getting the X or adult rating that would have kept it out of, all sorts of marketing in most theaters in the country.
Yeah, and that's just so different from movies of today too, because like this movie, I mean, heck, if we rated this, it might be rated like PG.
Well, there's a lot of swearing, which I think
That's
would
true.
take it into the R.
Okay.
I think if
PG-13, you can't swear.
you can have a couple F bombs, I think,
Okay.
but yeah, I would say this would have to it would still be an R today, and it still is an R rating. But if you chopped out some of the bad language, it would probably, yeah, be a PG-13 film. I feel like some of the other possession movies have been PG-13 because I've seen them in theaters that were more viscerally graphic.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like the difference between like, and it's like what we rate things on. Like, bad language, like, ooh, okay. And nudity, like this movie doesn't really have any nudity or any sexual, like there's sexual themes, but they very explicitly do not show you the graphicness of them. They
Right.
allude to them, and it's done in just such a good way. And then violence, like yes, there's violence, but very little blood. There's vomiting, which is just disgusting. There's cuts on her, but I mean in general, it's just not the kind of like violent horror movie that you, the things that happen in it are not the same things that happen in a lot of violent horror movies. Like even in The Ring, there was more like icky stuff that I associate with like being terrifying horror movie things.
Yeah. We'll
But that's
get
not to say this isn't scary. Like this is a very scary movie.
yeah, this movie does a really good job instilling like a fear of dread and like always questioning what'll happen next. Um, a couple more things before we get into the more specific parts of the movie. This was directed by William Friedkin, um, and the writer Blatley. He served as like executive producer, and him and the director got into many arguments over, scenes and actors and who was doing this and even like lighting and things. This movie had a really troubled development that we'll get into later. So it's really amazing that it came out as good as it did. Um, Friedkin the year before had released The French Connection, which is one of the more like famous movies in terms of like cinema history. It's looked at a lot for like its views in cinematography and its story, and especially like the action sequence, the car chase at the end. Um, a couple directors that were looked at to adapt this because the studio had like received the rights and were really interested in pushing forward and wanted a lot of like star power and energy. They wanted to get Stanley Kubrick. Um, they wanted John Borman, who had just made Deliverance the year before, which was at the time like the next wildly successful horror movie. They went on to work on the Exorcist sequel, and then another director, Peter Bogdanovich, was hired on as well, but didn't
I
end up making the
Yeah,
film.
I would love to imagine the universe where this was done by Kubrick, because that would have been a different film.
Yeah, I really don't think I can picture that. I don't have any
Yeah.
idea what he would have done.
So, for my like just pondering, like when was A Clockwork Orange? because like that's the movie that I think is like as the closest to like so 71, two
Yeah.
years before. So ooh, that would have been interesting because it's got so many of the same elements. And it could have, he could have added some nice organ music and, maybe some more like creepy hallways, creepy priests, imagine how Kubrick's direction would have defiled the church the altar. Would have been a totally different film, and I wish we could see it, but alas.
Yeah, I don't even think I have the imagination to go along with this bit. Um,
Well, if we ever run out of things to do, we could create the Stanley Kubrick radio show version of The Exorcist.
yeah. Um, so one last thing. There are many versions of this film. The one we watched was currently or is currently streaming on HBO Max, and I believe that is the original theatrical cut of the film, um, which is a bit shorter than the restorations and like remakes that came or the re-releases that came out in the early 2000s that most people are probably more familiar with. Watching it on, TV or renting it from the video store. So our film starts, well, it starts in Iraq, but that doesn't really become relevant until much later. But our film centers around a very sweet and innocent family.
Yeah, so in the beginning of this film, they really do a great job of creating a sense of warmth with these characters. You get a feeling that this mom really loves and cares about her daughter, even though she's a famous actress. The daughter has a tutor who lives with them. They're staying here at this house on location for a film, but it's not their normal home. At the same time, they feel very at home there.
Hmm.
The daughter is also very normal. They give her quite a few scenes very early on in the beginning to show how sweet she is, how much she likes horses, how much she, likes other people and is outgoing. Um and her mom have a good relationship. And then, and I think all of those are really great to set, the stage for, what happens later on.
Yeah, as the film goes, not only does their relationship just get destroyed, both of the characters physically and mentally are just broken down into like shadows of their former selves by the end of it.
Yeah, and I think that the way that, in a lot of these movies, in a lot of horror movies, it starts with the kind of like broken family moving into the house that they bought on sale because it was haunted and, having to deal with, the already having issues of having too many kids and being poor or having like a very volatile relationship. Whereas this film sets us up with two characters who clearly love and care about each other, who, try to do what's best for each other. And all this is very much a movie of bad things happening to good people because they don't really give you a reason to dislike either the mom or the daughter.
Right. They feel very attacked because of their innocence, and it feels all the more tragic because of that. Um,
Yeah, did you want to talk about some of the other characters in the film? We also have the mom is a an actress and she's starring in some kind of 70s uh movie set on the Georgetown campus. It's set in Georgetown, near Washington D.C. And she has a flirtation going on with the director of the film, and the daughter actually comments on that, like, "Oh, mom, are you going to get married to the director guy?" And she's like, "Oh, he likes you." And the mom's like, "No, no, we're just friends and he's lonely." So that kind of sets up that relationship, but he's not a main character really in the film. He does, he is involved.
Yeah, he has his moments. The There's other supporting cast. We mentioned Reagan's tutor before, but they also have two like live-in servants, I guess. One's like a maid and the other's like their driver and like groundskeeper. Um, and they're just kind of along for the ride. They don't seem to have a lot of agency, but they're there and kind of help out.
Yeah, and while they're not like it's kind of interesting because these people supporting them in the house, they're not family. They're not like they don't interact with them too much, but you can tell that they all have, a good enough relationship with them. There's no like yelling at the servants to do stuff. There's no, like browbeating or anything like that.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of an argument about whether or not there's rats in the attic, but other than that, like it's a very copacetic environment.
yeah. Um, our director said that the actress Linda Blair, who was playing Reagan, was they were smart, but they weren't, an overbearing character. They were cute, but not beautiful. They were a happy, normal 12-year-old girl. And this really set the stage of like having her to have, a lot of these great moments surrounded by these characters. She was familiar with the book and understood its subject matter, which I read in an article, kind of a cringy conversation she had with the director that just made me feel uncomfortable. Um, but due to some of the subject matter, there were a number of stand-ins who also played Reagan's character. Um, one
Oh,
of
so she didn't necessarily do all the scenes that, like the provocative ones?
uh, that is what's implied. So Eileen Dietz was a stand-in and the face of the demon Pazuzu. Um, but they amounted for, and this is in the final directorial cut that added 10 minutes to what we watched, they amounted for, they said, about less than 30 seconds of screen time. Um, and as such, I don't think they were credited, but they had claimed to be the stand-in for all of the demonic possession scenes, which that's been like refuted by other people. But I believe they were the stand-in for some of the more provocative scenes that you obviously wouldn't want a 12-year-old child to do. Um,
Yeah.
I think she was actually 14 at the time of filming, but that doesn't matter. Um, there was the spider walk scene, which is not in the original version, but is in subsequent releases where they walk down the stairs backwards, um, like on all fours, which is really freaky. That was performed by a stunt person that didn't get properly credited at the time. And the demonic voice was originally going to be Linda Blair through uh, like synthesizer type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, voice modulator.
yeah, but that didn't play very well, so they hired Mercedes McCambridge, who did not receive any credit on it, despite the demonic voice being like a huge part of the film and what really like makes a lot of the horror there. She didn't receive credit until the Screen Actors Guild started like an arbitration process to get her that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's this is stuff that, if this stuff all happened today, we wouldn't, like somebody wouldn't have all the answers. But because this movie is so old, 50 years ago, there are a lot of questions like this. And also thanks to unions, these kinds of support personnel get a lot more credit than they used to.
Yeah, there are a lot of roles and things in this film that like are in there for a bit, and several people who don't receive the credit. And this is from a much different era of Hollywood than we've talked about before. This is, I think, the oldest film we've talked about. This predates Jaws by a couple years. Um, it's very different in a lot of ways that just like things were done. These like big productions, like so many studio executives had to sign off on every decision. The films aren't made with a lot of money comparatively, especially to what they are today. A lot less unions, just a lot more like I think exploitation of people. I guess we'll talk about that a bit later with the curse, and like safety.
Yeah. Yeah, thankfully, workplace safety and OSHA requirements have changed a little bit in 50 years.
Yeah. So would we like to move on to talk about the possession of the film, the
Yeah.
main story?
Yeah, so so after, establishing this, sweet and innocent family that love each other very dearly, stuff starts to happen where Reagan starts to act weird, and she's having trouble sleeping. Her bed is vibrating at night, and um stuff gets bad really quickly.
Yeah. Initially it's just, she has trouble sleeping, she's physically sick, and then it rapidly deteriorates into her being like abusive and violent and very scary.
I do want to mention the initial scene. The first time she does anything really weird, her mom is having a party for all the people on the film. And they're singing and dancing and playing on the piano. And Reagan comes down the stairs, stops, stares at somebody, tells them they're going to die, and then pees on the floor. And I found that to be, like, because they've set up this situation where, like, this girl would never pee on the floor because of just the way she is. She's nice, she understands social cues, she understands she shouldn't, go downstairs and interrupt this party.
Yeah, it's part of the demon that like gets a rise out of like humiliating her and
Hmm.
humiliating her mom and like making everyone uncomfortable. Like that's part of its like fun that it has, which is like really disturbing, but also sets you up to be like, oh shit, anything can happen here.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a way, it's a little sexual with the peeing and the like. It just it feels very off. It feels like something you shouldn't see. It feels, um, dirty and disgusting, and so many of the things that the demon makes her do fall into that, where it's just so provocative and so like jarring. There's another scene pretty early on where the demon, makes her get out of bed, and like there are people over. I'm not sure if it's a doctor, but they're standing in her doorway, and she like pulls up her nightgown and yells that she wants like one of the men to fuck her. And having a 12-year-old say that under the possession of the demon, like, that's just so terrible.
Yeah, it's incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's another scene that's like they get really weird with it. Um, and there was a lot of contention between the director and producer about it. And the director was like, we put 50 seconds in the film of the crucifix scene, and we had a lot more, but that was about as much as anybody working on it could like stomach. And that was one of the scenes that like became really iconic and really just despicable and disgusting. Um, really just the height of the demons just terrifying grasp on our characters.
Yeah. And so on top of these like extremely uncomfortable sexual like things that the demon makes her do, there's other horrifying things like, vomiting in everybody's face is a huge one. And then obviously turning her head 360 degrees around, which
Yeah,
I'd be interested to know how they did that, because that was a interesting thing to watch because it looks so real.
it was a puppet.
Of course it was.
Yep, it was
Yay,
a dummy.
puppets.
Um, they put a lot of effort into it to make it look like her,
Mm-hmm.
which, even back then would have been, very challenging feat. Um, a couple other effects things now. She wore these like green contact lenses that made her look like more bestial and terrifying. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a scene where like I think Reagan's trying to communicate through her body past the demon, where on her stomach they've written "Help me," and they
Mm-hmm.
did that with having like a latex stomach, and then like I think some kind of like material that when it was exposed to heat would like puff up and make the "Help me," so it like had like this very like natural and organic reveal, which is very uncomfortable. And like I feel like if we've seen that in more films now, but it would just be like scars would start to open up that would say something like that. Like it would be a whole lot less subtle.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that I really liked about this movie was how subtle a lot of the things were. Like this is a very long movie. It's 2 hours and it really takes, an hour and 15, an hour and 20 before a lot of these like really horrifying, really disgusting, more things that are closer to the thing happening.
Mhm.
So it really builds in a slow manner. Like I thought that the beginning of the movie was very slow, and if you were going to cut anything, I would have cut, 20 minutes from the beginning there.
Well,
But I do think that it added to this like the build up for
yes.
the possession really getting going.
Yeah.
And
In a
yeah, go on.
similar way to Jaws, how like you get like these murmurs and like these elements of like something's not quite right. Like there's the attic and things, and then like it just starts taking off, and it really doesn't let up in the whole like last quarter of the movie. It's just them dealing with it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's very much a crescendo. And as I mean, some of the things that the demon makes her do, repeat, but they in general are just getting worse and worse. And I think that, especially like that scene, the fuck me scene, I think that, that's a very early on one. And I think that, having that be very early on is giving the audience like, oh, well, what the fuck could come next, like
yeah,
that
how
was
how
terrible.
yeah, how can this get more extreme?
Mm-hmm. And it
Um,
does, and it just keeps getting more and more extreme. And I think this is a problem that a lot of horror movies today have not been able to, successfully deal with.
yeah, they, kind of a lot of them have their like moments early on and then keep repeating them, but just add like in things to be gross out. Whereas this like does a good job of building that dread of like it's gonna get worse, but how?
Yeah.
Um, so Kate, you are our resident ghost expert.
Oh, I guess I am.
Yes, big fan of Zach Baggins.
I am a Ghost Adventures aficionado.
So you told me at the beginning there are no ghosts in this movie.
There are no ghosts. It's a demon.
Yes. So in The Ring, we talked about like an element of horror that I think makes good horror is having like a mythology and like a lore behind it. And
Mhm.
this movie doesn't really have that.
No, it doesn't.
It's
But
it's
it tries to, and it like especially with the beginning scene of the archaeologist, finding stuff and then discovering that demon statue. Like I really, thought we were going in that direction and we don't.
so I also noticed that the like one of the sculptures, because like Reagan's an artist, one of the sculptures she makes is like a winged thing that looks like the demon statue. Um, and then at the end, there's like a trinket that the priest in Iraq found, um, and I don't really know what like the implication is if she somehow got a hold of this somehow or he left it there. But like there's this through line of somehow this demon from across the world manifested itself here. Uh,
Yeah.
did it do it
Yeah.
with the Ouija board? I don't think so. I
Oh,
th
yeah, I forgot about the Ouija board element too.
Yeah, there's at the beginning there's like this Ouija board that they find that like actually seems to work, and Reagan plays it by herself and is talking to Captain Howdy or something. Um, there are a number of like voices that the demon talks to people through. One of them is through Father Karras's mother she talks as, and a couple others, but it's all very unexplained, which I think actually helps add to like the horror and mystery and like wanting to uncover what's going on, even though we don't get it.
Yeah, and I think that, it could add to that, like Lost phenomenon where, people want to watch it and then talk about it and then go watch it again. And I wonder if that was something to do with, how often it was in theaters and the more like cult following that it had.
Yeah, I definitely think that was an aspect of it. This movie did get a variety of sequels, and I'm pretty sure one of them explores heavily like the lore, but that is one that is pretty badly panned. But horror sequels, especially, are very difficult to make, and more often than not, I think are flops.
Yeah, and that's why, The Conjuring I thought was a great series because the second one is as good as the first one, and it's a hit or miss situation. I mean, in any series, it's a hit or
Yeah,
miss with the, sequels, prequels situation.
but being that
Um,
horror movies are incredibly profitable, the first one's payout is likely going to pay for like the next four.
right, yeah. Well, and I'm curious to read the book too. Like I'm curious to see if the book would give us any answers or leave those doors open for further explanation.
Well, there is one aspect of the book, the medical element, that gets much more explored. This movie kind of glosses over a few things, but in the book, it's explained that like every symptom Reagan is experiencing has like some kind of real basis in, the medical circles. Because she's doing a lot of like swearing and shouting at people. That could be, construed as like something like Tourette's. They do this procedure to map images of her brain to try to find a lesion, and they don't find that. They resort to like psychologists and things, but it's very like broad strokes what they're doing. But that doesn't stop the medical scenes from being like the absolute most gut wrenching things in this movie.
Yeah, thinking about our mother's reaction to this, I can't believe that she watched this, had that reaction, and then decided to be a nurse.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, the medical field back then, I mean, I don't know how these procedures would be performed today. They might be exactly the same, and that's horrifying. But like medical stuff is just icky. And I mean, there are very few films where like they harness the horror of getting, medical stuff done. And I mean, this is one, and this is just yikes.
Yeah, this is something I was not expecting at all,
Yeah.
which made it all the worse.
Well, and it does it in a very similar way to Alien, which, Alien might have, used this from this movie or other similar movies,
Mhm.
in that the medical theater is so brightly lit and everything's very pastel or white. So the color of blood, when it comes out and it's on things, it's just like there and in your face. And, worse, we have these terrible, painful things being done to a child. Ah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, there are so many shots in this film that are just like well lit, especially like in their house of where all the terror is happening, that you don't see today. Every horror movie is dark all the time. This really like
Yeah.
broke that mold of just like we're showing you everything. Uh,
Well, and I loved the contrast between, whatever was happening in the bedroom in the last, quarter of the movie. Everything happening in the bedroom tended to be pretty dark because they had to remove a lot of the lights because she kept knocking them over, those kinds of things. But then as soon as they step out of the bedroom into the hallway with the staircase, it's so well lit, and
it's a
it
normal
shows
house.
all yeah, it's a normal house, but it's able to show all the dejection on their faces, and their unhappiness and like all of that. But it's also not creepy in the hallway because there's no like allusions to ghosts or other demons hiding behind doors, and that kinds of stuff that shows up in a lot of other horror movies where they create a absolute horror in the house, whereas
Hmm.
this one, the horror is entirely encased in Reagan.
Yes. Um, so the medical horror scene was one of those that got like a lot more publicity in terms of like people talking about it. It was referred to as being unappetizing, needless, revolting, and genuinely disturbing. Um, and real doctors like weighed in and were like, "Yeah, that's how that procedure would be done." Um, and it's just disgusting.
That's
Uh,
terrifying.
yeah. So I think like part of it is just how like uh desperate it is. Of like we're doing this procedures, we're putting this girl in a lot of pain to like try to help her, and then it not working is like the gut wrenching part of it for me is just how
Yeah,
like useless it is.
and as the audience, we know it's nothing in our mind, and we know that it's not a whatever because we're there to see The Exorcist, and we believe that it's a demon. Um, and so we know that she's going through all this stuff needlessly, and we also have that compassion for the mother who's just doing everything she can, throwing all the money she can at trying to find a solution, and yelling at all these doctors, and it's just so hopeless, and that, and it's just like the emotional connection is just so big there.
Yeah. So would we like to move on to talking about more of our characters?
Yeah.
So one of the main characters in this film, uh, one of the titular exorcists, is Father Karras, who's played by Jason Miller, um, who is based on Rocky Marciano, who's a boxer dude.
Yeah, so like the reason we're bringing this up is like, an hour through the movie, you've seen a whole bunch of scenes of this Karras guy who's this priest who clearly cares about his mother, and loves, and he cares about his patients, and he's a good guy, but he's also like working out all the time like Rocky Balboa, and he looks like Rocky Balboa, and he, the policeman knows he's a boxer, and there's pictures of him being a boxer. So it's just like, what, why is Rocky Balboa the priest in The Exorcist? But it
He,
turns out that both Rocky Balboa and this Karras guy are based kind of on this, like, archetype of this other, Greek Italian um, boxer guy, Rocky Marciano, which I think, is kind of like that attractive heartthrob kind of a guy, maybe? I don't know.
it's very confusing.
Yes, it confused me throughout the entirety of watching this because I was like, well, when did Rocky come out? It comes out 3 years later after this. So, it's just a very bizarre. It's also like you don't normally have priests that, are boxers.
Yeah,
Like
he
it's not a normal thing.
he's a priest, he's a boxer, he's a psychologist, like he's everything.
Yeah, a mama's boy.
Yes. Um, Yeah, he gets built up. He gets a lot of characterization in this film, which is interesting considering that like every other horror film I know that has like, the religious angle, their one character trait is they are religious. Whereas like
Yeah.
he has like, this whole like buildup of him taking care of his mom. She gets sick, dies, and he's like he feels so responsible. And then the whole reason why we're experiencing these aspects of his life is because the demon goes on to taunt him about it. And it's, supposed to be awful and visceral for us and to know all these things and to question like how on earth does the demon know like this is real, this is scary. um,
Yeah. And, it shows like when the demon's taunting him, it shows that he's, well, and him being a boxer and also a psychologist and having these like occupations outside of the church shows that he also might already have, some crises of faith already. And the demon, uses those to just pry into him and try to corrupt him and use him.
yeah, it's it's really another part of like the tragic story here, especially with how his character ends. um,
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I think that, it's his goodwill and his, his need to make things right and to do the right thing kind of like overcomes him and his
yeah,
strength.
yeah, as soon as he sees the little girl and like whatever's gotten a hold, he doesn't initially think like, oh, she's possessed by a demon, but like he wants to help her. And when like he realizes that that might be the last chance, he goes full bore with it.
Yeah.
um Considered for this role, and this, I think the first one is very funny. This is who they wanted to be the actor. They wanted Jack Nicholson, which
Wow.
I feel like he could not do it. I feel like he's not that type of
Well, Jack Nicholson in 73 was a different guy than Jack Nicholson in 80.
right. But uh, maybe it's just because I see him so much as being in The Shining or being in Chinatown. I think he's a bit too charismatic for this character. This character is very reserved. You can tell what he cares about, but he's not like as flamboyant, I guess, as Jack Nicholson usually is.
Garrett, I am going to disagree with you because I Googled Jack Nicholson 1973 and I got the film he was in, which was called The Last Detail, where he is a sailor. And I swear to you, Garrett, flamboyant is exactly the word that I would use to describe these images. He looks like a very flamboyant gay man.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that Jack Nicholson is too flamboyant for this character. Like he has too much of just like a very natural presence. Um,
Yeah,
I
yeah, it would be an interesting, it would be totally different. It would be an interesting in because he's very emotive too.
Yes.
So like and I mean with yeah. I'm sorry, these pictures from this movie are just so like so strange. I'm going to put it down. But yeah, yeah, that would have been just a totally different movie completely. And because Karras and the actor that plays him gives this very like solemn, brooding performance,
Mhm.
and it yeah I thought that it was very good. Jack Nicholas would have been different for
Yeah.
sure. I need to watch some early Jack Nicholas movies apparently because they look very interesting.
Um, Another one of our characters is the other priest, Father Miran. who's played by Max von Sydow. He was 44 at the time and plays a much, much, much older guy. They used a lot of special effects, makeup, and artistry to make him look a lot older. Why they didn't get a more naturally older person, I don't know. I couldn't really find that one out.
Yeah, I when I read that, I was like, that's very bizarre. Like, why did they need to do that?
Yeah,
Maybe it was because they thought that like the physicality of like what would need to be done on set would be too much for someone that
that's a
older.
good point because people do get thrown around and knocked around and are have to be very physical and emotive, especially during the exorcism.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets violent.
Yeah, so these two priests they come together and they perform this exorcism, and that's where like really wild shit starts to happen. And we include this in our special effects slide because most of I think the really like incredible and supernatural things happen here, and they're all done practically. This is obviously long before the time of computer generated effects. Um, this is, pretty cutting edge for a lot of the stuff they were doing to make things look and feel a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved all the effects in this movie, and so much of it, especially in the last, 20 minutes, was me like wondering how the heck they did these things. Like she's levitating off the bed, the bed's moving, there's everybody has, you can see their breath because it's very cold. There's so many interesting things that they do, like beyond just the vomit and the cuts and the scrapes. But there are just so many cool special effects in this one.
Yeah. So Reagan's room was on a refrigerated set for basically any scene you can see their breath. The refrigerated set broke down constantly and was -20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the same in Celsius. Very, very cold. Um, it was so cold that they could only really shoot scenes for 3 minutes at a time. After that, people would be like too cold to continue. The lights that they were using to light the set would start to heat up the room. Um, Reagan, our main character, she was only wearing like pajamas, and she claims to have like an aversion from the cold because of this. And as a result of like all these contributing factors, they could only ever shoot like 5 scenes a day. So everything that was shot in this room took 2 months to finish, which is what contributed to the production schedule ballooning to 200 days or, basically a year.
Yeah, and that's just crazy to me. Like and it's interesting too that the idea that they thought that the seeing the breath and it being cold in the room was so important that they had to do that. I mean, that would, if I even figured out after a few days of shooting that this was gonna, be a problem, and you'd only get to have 5 scenes a day, I would be like, no, we're gonna forget it, the refrigeration room, and just going. Like we'll use the breath scenes like when we need it. Like, cut it down to being just a few things. But that's one of the things that I was talking about earlier about this commitment in cinema. There's a commitment to getting it right that we have with movies that doesn't show up in TV, and certainly didn't show up at TV in this era.
Yeah, this you wouldn't have seen anything close to this on television at all. Um, a lot of actors in this film are actually from like more like serial TV things, which is what helped them be like kind of unknown. But then they were playing these much different characters, um, which led to a lot more of like that realism of these being like normal people experiencing something horrifying. Um, so the effect on screen now is them floating. And this was done with the harness wires, but back then we didn't have like the technology to really edit them out. So the wires had to be painted to like match the background, and that took a lot of effort and a lot of time. And really just a terrifying thing, to be wearing, a big harness and suspended in the air. I'm sure that wasn't, uncomfortable at all.
Yeah, that would have been pretty uncomfortable for sure.
And as we mentioned earlier, the spinning scenes were accomplished by using a dummy. I couldn't find out what the vomit was made of in this one. Usually I like talking about those sort of things. Um, but I don't think this had the lubricant that was, a part of our more favorite special effects.
Well, and I didn't notice any cream corn either, but I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, it could have been in there.
The one that I thought was really interesting was the way that they made the bed shake.
Oh yeah, so they had like a forklift type thing in the wall behind it, because the bed had this like big headboard and it's a huge four-post bed. They were able to hide like a lot of the mechanical elements like behind that and underneath the skirt. Um, but it's the thing about her room is it seems like anybody's room. Like this could be anyone's. And I feel like that really helped make it more like real and scary and like this bed is possessed too.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And it's interesting too because like in The Haunting, which came out before this, there was a similar scene with the bed, but it was very different, like the treatment was very different and I like this. I also really liked how they changed the room over the course of, the movie where it goes from being a very nice little girl's room to then stuff's being knocked over all the time, so it just gets removed. And then finally at the end, they cover all the posts with, pillows and they tie her down to the bed and those kinds of things. And I thought that that was a nice way to, show the escalation, but also like something that you don't see in a lot of these possession movies. They don't like, put the, safety stuff around the hardwood furniture.
Yeah. Uh, the change in this room over time parallels a lot with like the removal of her humanity, um,
Mm-hmm.
and innocence throughout it to the point where uh, her mom doesn't want to put her in like an institution, put her in the padded cell. So we're just making the padded cell at home.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Uh,
it makes you wonder what would have happened if they would have gone that route. Like, would the demon have stayed with her? Would it have moved on? You know,
I think the demon could have had fun tormenting everybody that worked at an asylum, but
probably.
yeah, we don't have any idea what it wants.
It's true.
Uh, if we don't have much more to say, I think we can start talking about the curse of this film.
Yeah, yeah, I think that this is a good place to do it because we're talking about these special effects and this room and this house because they filmed it all in a house, right?
So they filmed a lot of the exterior shots in Georgetown, but the set itself was like built as different rooms in New York. Um, Towards the beginning of production, it was delayed 6 weeks because a bird started a fire when it flew into a circuit breaker, and that burned down the house sets, um, except for Reagan's room. Ooh.
Ooh.
Um, Early on
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean it's such an odd like thing to happen where, like a bird, I mean this is the 70s, electrical wiring wasn't as good, but still like it's an odd thing to happen.
yeah, and there were still birds in New York. Uh, Uh, the statue of Pazuzu, that they have at the beginning of the film, it was shipped to Hong Kong instead of Iraq, and that caused a 2 week delay in production there. Not a
Wait
big
a
deal.
second. They really filmed in Iraq?
Yeah, they filmed in 70s Iraq. 70s Iraq at that point was a better place.
No, I mean it's just like it's so interesting that they would make that effort to go, halfway across the globe to film, 20 minutes of footage. That's just really interesting to me.
Yeah. And as a part of the curse, this is one of the more recent effects. They filmed it in Hatra. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that right. That was where the opening scenes and like the big temple looking thing was. That was destroyed by ISIL militants in I think 2015. So the curse lives on through the destruction of historic preservation sites.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sure that 40 years later, that's why that happened.
Yes, it was because of the Exorcist movie. Um, Going back to like the original production, both Reagan and her mom received pretty terrible back injuries that they claim are still affecting them to this day, which isn't unheard of considering what happened. In one of the scenes, the mother was thrown around, and that resulted in her breaking her tailbone. And because they like didn't immediately get like the proper treatment or whatever, that led to like, just more pain down the road. She was on crutches for a few weeks, which meant she wasn't able to shoot her scenes. Um, as a result of the rocking bed, Reagan fractured a part of her lower spine and developed scoliosis.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah, I didn't think that was something you could necessarily like develop like that. I always thought that was something you were born with, like that was a
Well,
developmental thing. But being that she was a young woman growing, I
yeah.
imagine that contributed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably what happened is that just like it just became deformed as she grew older, and her spine grew.
It,
Yeah, that makes
uh,
sense to me.
both of the scenes where these injuries occurred were used in the final cut of the film, which honestly, like, sure. Um, I think in scenes like that, you kind of owe it to the people to keep those in, especially if it leads to a bit more real reaction. As morbid as that sounds, um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm fine with that in there.
it's very much like the Lord of the Rings factoid uh, when Aragorn kicks the helmet and breaks his toe, like, and screams out in fear of the hobbits is that
Mm-hmm.
that's the
Yeah,
cut you use.
yeah. You
Um,
certainly don't make him do it again.
break it again. We weren't recording. Um, there were another couple on-set injuries, including a carpenter cutting their thumb off and a lighting technician. They lost a toe somehow. I assume with one of like the rail cart type things. They were using a lot of really crazy shit back in the 70s.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm curious as to whether this was, like just an average amount of workplace injuries or above average, but I have to imagine it's pretty average or close to it for the number of days that they were filming. Like the whole
Yeah.
curse thing is like it's like such a part of the culture of the film, but I really wonder like how bad the average film set was back then.
So Flatley said, uh, if you shoot something for a year, people are going to get hurt. And just in general, like people are going to die. Like over the course of production, there was just more time for accidents to happen. Um, I'm sure if there was something like a greater statistical anomaly, then it would be, you know, more documented. But some people believe that the director and Warner Media, they were like trying to hype up the curse as like a part of a marketing tactic. And, that makes sense. It's something interesting to talk about. It's something that they did talk about in interviews before the film came out as like, the mystery behind it, which I think just heightened up people's like uh spiritual or like skeptical beliefs of what was going on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, a couple of people who were acting in the film also died. McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, the movie producer, died a week after filming his scenes, and Father Karras's mother, also the actress who played her, also died. before filming finished. I don't know if it was before her scenes were done or not, being that she dies in the movie, like it's, kind of part of it. And then six people related to those in production also died, but like this was a huge production with dozens and dozens and dozens of people. Like people die. Like it's not that crazy. Um, they also brought on a actual like person of the cloth, a priest, Father Birmingham, who is a technical advisor, and they went ahead and blessed a lot of the cast and crew. But they believe that doing anything more would like contribute to anxieties on set. Um, the director wanted them to like do an exorcism, which doesn't really make sense in the context of like what you would be doing here. But like, doing something like blessing the house, that, could have been something that they would have done, but they just thought doing something like that would put everybody on edge of like being like, ooh, are we really bringing demons into this?
Ooh. Yeah, I agree that I mean obviously they couldn't do a real exorcism because nobody was possessed. Um, but yeah, I it's interesting because like how much of this all of this stuff in general is in people's heads. And I thought that one of the interesting things in the movie was that when they question Reagan and her mom about them being religious, so, the Reagan, the demon in Reagan is like talking about all these religious things that she should have no idea about. And that's one of the things that clues Karis into her, potentially really being possessed.
Mhm.
So, like I think that that was kind of a theme is to like convince the non-believers that this is happening and that this is a demon in the Christian faith and, needs to be exorcised by Catholic priests and, that kind of thing. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that was a nice through line, especially when the doctors and psychiatrists were like, if she's faking and really believes in her mind that she's possessed by a demon, then if you had a priest come over and exorcise it, maybe that would, cause this like this mask to slip. Um, which is, our main character's like first thought that that's what this is. It's kind of hokey, it's kind of silly, but like, medicine was very different, and we need the movie to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, who knows? Like people, maybe people can believe that they are really possessed by a demon, or maybe there really are demons that can possess you. Or maybe, hormonal changes can cause serious misfirings in the brain.
Yeah, that's certainly all part of like the real mythology. I don't believe in any of it. I think it's mental illness, if it's anything at all. But you
Yeah.
know, if there was definitely, after this movie came out, a resurgence in some people's beliefs in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church also made like a bigger effort to perform these exorcisms and like make, money and influence and, whatever off of them. They definitely capitalized on this film a bit. But in terms of the terrible things that they do, not the worst.
Yeah, well, and I think that, if you can bring somebody peace who's suffering from some kind of mental break by performing this kind of a ritual, is that as good or better than, other mental health treatment? Maybe not.
I
If it,
suppose it's a perspective.
yeah, well, especially compared to, the stuff they were doing in the 70s, lobotomies and tranquilizers and just putting
Shock
people on
therapy,
shock therapy,
just
all
blasting
of
them on
those kinds of things.
drugs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
much rather be just like sprinkled with some water and told it was gonna be all right. Sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Fully. Fully and completely. I'd taking the exorcism over the shock therapy.
yeah, you bring up a good point here.
I mean, ultimately, if all of them are on the table, I'm jumping out the window, but you know.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of jumping out the window, that's how this film ends and resolves. Um, we exorcise the demon and jump out a window.
Yeah. Yeah, so the priest, takes it upon himself to welcome the demon inside himself and then uses his strength and faith to push himself out the window where he then dies and takes the demon to essentially hell with him, I guess, because
Fuck if
suicide
I
equals
know.
hell, you
Yeah, I
know.
don't.
Yeah, get with the religion, Gerrit.
Well, no, no, thank you.
I don't know. It's always interesting to me because, I am like extremely atheist, but I probably know more religious dogma and stuff than the average Catholic, and I was not raised Catholic. So, like, knowing all of these things, and also, like, I think that, and this movie does a good job of, like, doing it in, like, explaining that you need to respect people's faith, that, if they believe this, then, maybe it will, then maybe it's true to them at least in their own reality.
Right. The power of faith has its place here. If Reagan's mom were to read a book about exorcism and try to do it herself, it wouldn't have worked.
Hmm. And if she and Reagan like refused to, believe in this as a possible method, then it probably wouldn't have worked either,
Yeah, that's
if they were
true.
non-believers. But then they could have, used the movie to make her look like convince her to be a believer or something. I don't know. But that's a different movie. Maybe Exorcist 2 or 3. I don't know.
Speaking of different movies, The Exorcist Believer has just released in theaters to pretty terrible reviews. Um, this is a direct sequel to the first Exorcist, despite the fact that there were already 6 films in the series, um, or 5 other films before this one came out. Um, Reagan's mother, Chris McNeil, she returns uh, and comes back to this time she's stopping the new possession, which is funny that we just kind of talked about how she probably can't. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, I gotta believe they involve a priest too. Like,
yeah, yeah, you gotta imagine. Linda Blair, who played Reagan in the original, has gone on record saying she hasn't been contacted at all to like reprise her role or be a part of these series, which is kind of weird, considering it's like a reboot. Like they even got like Jamie Lee Curtis to come back for, the most recent time they tried rebooting the Halloween series. Like I feel like if you're going back to the roots and trying to make like something like it again, you have a better shot, pulling on the things that worked. Um, but maybe they do. Maybe they just try to do a remake of the first one, and that's why it doesn't work. Um, I don't know. I haven't seen it. But
I don't know
Peacock,
either.
yeah, but Peacock has got the distribution rights for the second and third films in this new trilogy. They bought that for $400 million. So I think they expect big things from this, and I don't think it's going to deliver. The second in this trilogy is already in development.
Well, I mean, maybe they think that it will, develop a cult following over time. They need to manufacture some curse. They need to, just talk about how people died on set, people got their limbs chopped off, those kinds of things,
They need to
you
keep it in
know.
theaters for 2 years. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and really, you have to avoid all the OSHA violations while you're doing this, which is going to be really hard. So it'll be
yeah.
interesting to see what happens.
Well, the screen actors haven't signed their new contract yet, so if any of them are actually involved, you can get away with doing a lot worse to them if they've broken the strike.
Oh, geez, scabs.
Yeah, got really depressing there. Um, so what did
So
we
what did we
learn?
learn?
Well,
Well, so we learned that where all of the big horror movie tropes came from.
Yeah. So looking at like a history of horror films, this is one that I think really sticks out as being not only iconic, but starting to like change the way into what we see as like modern horror. The 70s were like a big push for, what we all consider like horror movies to be. A few years after this, we get Jaws. At the end of the decade, we get Alien. We have a whole line of tropes that come directly from this movie, or at least are so iconic that that's what you see it from like having this little child that's like scary and terrifying, the gross out and body horror stuff, and my favorite, the like religious or like the scientist man who comes along to like explain and give us exposition of what's going on. um, there are just so many like little things and big things that this film popularized and that other films like stole and borrowed and used and utilized to like make their own mythos.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of that, it's the kind of thing that shows up in pop culture, the girl with the spinning head and the vomiting, the spider walk up the stairs, the priests, trying to, help. Apparently Rocky Balboa inspired by the Exorcist.
Wait, no, I
All
don't
kinds
think
of
that's how
elements.
it works.
I don't know. I think it might have been. If it was in theater for 2 years, you know, I think they were inspired.
I just want to see a cut of this film where instead it's Sylvester Stallone just like doing all the scenes, but that's never
See, and
gonna
that's the
happen.
thing. I don't think you would notice. Like, I think if you took this film and you just spliced in some footage of Rocky Balboa running in a tracksuit and working out, and maybe even like replace the photos of him boxing with Rocky photos,
Oh my
I don't
God.
think you would notice. I don't think you would notice, and that's so interesting.
Adrian, the power of Christ compels you.
Oh my God.
I can't I can't do Rocky, but it would be that bad. Um,
It would be fascinating, Garrett. And I think that, sadly, I don't think we can make it happen, but it should have.
in all the parodies, I don't think anybody's made this leap before, and it needs to be done. Damn it.
Yeah, yeah. We need to splice Rocky and The Exorcist together.
Yeah, we
The
didn't we didn't talk about this when we talked about The Ring. Um, I guess we did a little bit, but like, yeah, so much of like being exposed to these films is like through like parodies and things. But like the biggest being exposed to this was Reagan, the child, as they're like as the demon with all the cuts and shit on her face, was the scary image that would just appear at the end of videos or just as like a screamer in video games and stuff. It was awful. I hated it.
Yeah, I don't think I ever experienced that phenomenon.
What?
Given so we experienced the internet at different times, Garrett, and
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
that's fair. That's very
yeah.
fair.
Yeah, so but I can imagine it, at the end of like a TikTok or something. Like I know that so
Yes.
this is the 15 years ago short YouTube film clips. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying like I wasn't watching that part of the internet at that time.
Okay. I mean, I thought this was like a ubiquitous experience.
Yeah, nope, nope, not for me. But I think of like her like I think there's like a Simpsons episode where it parodies the head spinning.
Oh, probably.
It just stuff like that. It shows up in all kinds of things, and like the possessed little girl vomiting. I mean, that's a huge, trope in a lot of media and other horror movies too.
Oh yeah. Um, this spawned the whole genre of like possessed people movies. Granted, there were a few. like it before, in terms of like somebody's possessed, but this, I think, laid out the formula.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's about all I have.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Um,
Yeah. Good film. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that it holds up 50 years later. I was concerned that it wasn't going to. I was a little concerned, especially after just watching The Thing and
yeah,
being like, no, this is bad. This is just garbage. And I was worried about that, especially for a 2 hour long movie. It was very slow. It doesn't fall into a lot of our modern horror sensibilities, but it was a very well done, well written, well shot movie. And the only complaint that I have is that it was pretty slow and drawn out in the first half.
yeah. I mean, I really liked it. I didn't think it was that slow. It really helped build up the dread and tension. But for something 50 years old, like, damn, pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that my main complaint with the slowness was the archaeology scene was very long and we never really connected back to it in a, solid way. And then a lot of the
Yeah,
scenes with Karis early on are just kind of like following him around and watching him do things. And it just because there's no connection yet to the family, it just felt kind of like off. But I think that that's all just our modern sensibility of where, we want the characters to, accidentally run into each other at the park. Or, like the guy pets her dog, or they say hello on the street. Like those are just more modern connections that we use now that they obviously didn't think were important back then. Like they
yeah,
were okay with the separate storylines coming together separately over time.
yeah. I mean, there was a little bit of connection, but more or less just because it's near the same place. It it works though. I feel like following the two stories, it worked. Came together in the end for a pretty spectacular payoff.
Yeah. Yeah, it really did. Good movie.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you all for watching.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Give this movie a like, subscribe. It does help us reach more people and shows us that people are actually listening and want to hear more. Um, and be sure to comment your favorite horror movie, maybe your favorite early horror movie, or something really important to that you think connects to the development of horror movies over time. I think that was a huge theme in this one.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
looking forward to reading those suggestions. Share with your friends. Even if you didn't like our Star Wars takes, we won't talk about that again for a while, so you
Yep.
don't have to worry about that.
Yep. We'll watch new stuff and have more hot takes that you disagree with.
Indeed. But discourse is the spirit of humanity. So it's all good.
Okay. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night.